Right, I think let's kick off. I think we're at sort of 11:33. We've got lots of people on the call, so thank you for joining us. I'm glad to say as well the lawnmower has stopped outside my house this morning, and the building work is not happening. So hopefully it's a nice clear line. But hello everybody, and welcome to our webinar. It is great to see so many people joining us today. I know we've got a really diverse group of people. Lots of clients are here from different types of industries like design, technology, customer experience, marketing. But anyway, thank you very much for joining us. And this is actually the fifth and final webinar in a series from Gemini. I'm delighted to say we'll be introducing our adaptive strategy. Now, I was just doing a bit of research before sort of giving this webinar today, and I worked out it's 114 days since lockdown started. And actually, a number of us back at Idean developed the adaptive strategy at the start of the period of lockdown. And I think what's great about sort of presenting it to everybody today, obviously in brief rather than the full piece, is actually the adaptive strategy we coined it is arguably even more relevant today than it was 114 days ago. And I think one of the reasons for that, which we'll be talking everybody through, is that all businesses and brands that we work with have gone through this period of gradual transition. Certainly in the short term, it was how do we survive the changing business climate, and how do we actually work remotely, all of those kind of core things. But now businesses are waking up and starting to think a bit more about, rather than just how do we plan short term, what does mid to long term look like as well. So we're going to be running through a lot of that over the next 45 minutes. And just click to the next slide. There we go. So I'm delighted to say there are three of us here today, as I'm sure you can see. My name is Rob Bartlett. I'm going to be your host for this session. I'm a vice president at Idean, relatively new to the company. It's been here about 6 months. And before that, I was working in advertising and digital marketing agencies in around London. So that's me. But glad to say, joined here by Annika from Idean. But Annika, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Hello, everyone. I'm Annika Bruysten. I've been with Idean for around 5 years. I'm a business design director, which basically means that whenever we work with our clients, my role is to make sure that whatever we create creates business value as well, so makes money. So that's my role most of the time, with a specific focus on proposition development as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Annika. And I'm also delighted we have a special guest here today. So we've actually worked with Elin for the last almost 3 years. But Elin is here to give the client perspective on all things sort of coronavirus adaptive strategy. But Elin, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Elin Mclean. I'm the general manager for SMARTY, which is Three's sub-brand. I've been with SMARTY since it was just a concept on a piece of paper, and now we're nearly 3 years old. So delighted to come and talk a little bit about our journey today.
Fantastic. And I just wanted to say, like, in this new remote world we're working in, I'm pretty boring where I'm calling in from. I'm calling from St Albans, but Annika, you're in Holland today, aren't you? And Ellen, you're up near Glasgow as well. So it's good to see remote working in full flight. Okay, so just a very quick couple of slides to introduce really Idean and who we are for those who don't know us. Right at the heart of really of our DNA is we have this phrase called challenge what's possible. And that really defines how we approach work with clients, the kind of people we hire, the services we offer. And I think, there's been a lot written, obviously, about coronavirus. All of us in this call have been, no doubt, studying lots of stuff. But I think that idea of challenge and actually clients taking on that sort of mantra of being a challenger brand is really important right now. And what it means in terms of the kind of work we do for our clients is there's sort of two ways that we help our clients challenge what's possible. So point one you can see here is we help our clients challenge through their existing businesses to be the market leader. And that means really looking at their fundamental product, service, or experience and seeing how we can transform that to make them as fit for purpose as possible. And the second area is we actually challenge the market by launching totally new business and ventures. And SMARTY is a brilliant example of that. I mean, SMARTY is almost 3 years old, and we'll talk about that more as we go through the next sort of 45 minutes or so. So we've also got a really nice quote here. Now, if there are any Ideanists on the call, they've probably seen this one before, so apologies for using it again, but it is fantastic. And it's from a gentleman called Jack Welch, who's the former CEO of General Electric. And just to quickly read this out, I think it's even more pertinent today, than it has really ever been over the last, couple of decades. But he said, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. And I think we're all super aware. I mean, again, there have been quite a few quotes out there that we're seeing the biggest economic and social change since World War II. And again, overnight, the ONS, Office of National Statistics, reported that our economy in the first 3 months of this year, or up until May, the last 3 months of the year, I should say, have been reported, shrank by 19.1%. So it's clear change is all around us. And actually, it's changing at such a rapid pace. It's incredibly important all of us think about how we can change at a similar pace ourselves. So what that means in terms of the webinar itself, we're going to talk about sort of four big topics. So first of all, what we're calling the lasting impacts of coronavirus. That'll be on a couple of different levels. That'll be, I think it's useful to get personal input there as well. So Elin, Annika and I have all sort of got a view about how coronavirus is impacting us as individuals, as well as Annika is going to go and talk about a bit more about sort of broader trends that we can all front into. Then we're going to do a interview around SMARTY and the case study. And then Annika will sort of wrap us up with just a few sort of key thoughts from our adaptive strategy. Now, of course, we'll be running a Q&A as well. Hopefully, we'll have sort of 10-ish minutes at the end to go and cover all your questions. We're using WebEx, which is relatively new to me, if I'm totally honest, but I think everybody should see the Q&A functionality. So people can sort of post questions throughout. We'll do our best to keep an eye on those and answer them. And I think it'll be easier just for me as the host if people can try and post into the a Q&A for everybody rather than for a specific individual as well. Fantastic. So yeah, just getting on to sort of personal perspectives on coronavirus. And I do think it is important to share these personal stories because ultimately, as brands and businesses, we need to empathize with our customers. And actually, all of us are ultimately customers of all the brands and businesses we represent. But the reason I showed this image is the change has been, phenomenal. And I think traditions and habits that I've had or society have really flipped overnight. And I think there's certain really pretty powerful things going on out there at the moment. There's obviously things like issues that are being raised more than ever before around race and Black Lives Matter, inequality, isolation, the importance of family, really, really important things about the fabric of our society. And I don't want to underplay those at all because they're hugely, hugely important. But I think there is a flip side, which is the positivity of radical change. And I think people are really wanting to see the world get better. And in YouGov, there's a great statistics, which is only 9% of people want to life to return to how it was before lockdown. So I think this idea of wanting to move the world forwards is all around us, and we can read about it in the papers every day. And just before I hand over to Elin, I think just one more sort of quick story for me is that sadly, my family was actually impacted by coronavirus as well. So my mother-in-law did contract coronavirus. It made her have a stroke, which is pretty horrendous, obviously, and she was called into A&E. Glad to say it was a very minor stroke and she is recovering very well now. But I think for us as a family, it suddenly took coronavirus from something that's happening around us into a very, very personal experience. I'm sure many people, on this webinar today can empathize with that as well. So I think, from me, how we understand what is going on out there in the world around us is hugely important, and really core to our adaptive strategy is putting customers at the heart of everything that we do. So that's my little intro. And then I know you had a thought you wanted to go and a couple of thoughts you wanted to share about your experiences as well.
Yeah, sure. So this is a picture of my daughter on the golf course opposite where I live, which during lockdown turned into a really nice place for us to go and walk, and a really sort of peaceful place, and brought some calm, I think, to day-to-day life. And lockdown for me actually has had a few positive impacts. So to give you some more information about me, I live in Glasgow, usually work around 3 days a week down in London. And also this year, I've just been returning from maternity leave for my second daughter. So really what lockdown meant for me was actually I didn't have that weekly commute down through Heathrow. I wasn't getting up in the morning for the red-eye flight. And I was able to have a little bit more balance with the family, so I could do things like this. I could pop out after dinner and take my daughter for a quick walk, be away from people a little bit more, and not so much part of a week that just felt very intense, and balancing work and family life along with that long commute. And also there was a bit of a levelling of the playing field. So someone who travels to work 3 days a week and then works remotely, usually a couple of days, I found that I was no longer at a disadvantage because there weren't any corridor conversations going on. When I was joining calls and meetings, everyone was joining remotely. And just some of those little things for me actually really helped. And I think made things feel a little bit less London-centric. So webinars in place of traditional networking events. So yeah, my perspective on lockdown, although scary at times and certainly has had some negative impacts, is that it's brought a little bit more balance to my life, which has been something that's been quite nice.
Thanks, Elin. Annika, do you want to?
Yeah, I think I can only echo that. I think also as a mom, for me, this balance has made a huge difference. I think on the other hand, also obviously you have to consider that juggling kids at home that need to be entertained with work is not always that peaceful. But in a way, it also gives you a little bit more control over your working day. Also just in terms of, it's asynchronous work. So like, when are you most productive during your day? And I've actually also noticed huge differences. And it's actually much nicer for me to be able to spend the time during those hours of the day that I'm more productive, more focusedly. I think what I do miss is the spontaneity of working with my team. And actually, it has really made me value those moments of collaboration way more when they do happen. But on a lighter note, it's not all serious. I think we've also had some really entertaining cases of corona cuts in our team. And I must say, I wouldn't have anticipated quite so much talk about sourdough and men moaning about not having had a haircut quite this much. So it's been quite fun. I think, however, when it comes to the adversity that we're facing right now, I think everyone has become much more aware that we really have a part to play in our interconnected world. And it's also reminded us that we have an enormous opportunity to shape our society and the businesses that we exist within. And so actually, when we were working with our clients and talking to them, we've noticed that a lot of people right now are taking stock of their lives, of their careers, of the trajectories that their businesses are on. And they're actually also giving themselves the permission to ask much deeper questions than they would have otherwise dared to. And so we've also asked ourselves, how can we make this a change for the better? How can we support businesses to become more resilient and succeed in this sort of uncertain future? And so that was actually also the starting point for us to work on the adaptive strategy, as actually looking at how can we support businesses in becoming more adaptable to the sort of environment that's really unpredictable. And so if you look at sort of society at large, you can really see that the pandemic has accelerated inevitable change. So a lot of these changes would have probably happened over the course of several years. And now they've been compressed into a matter of months or even weeks. And you can also see that many businesses are choosing not to reopen some of their retail stores. You can see consumers embracing new digital behaviors in all aspects of their lives. So if you look at this chart, for example, you can see that across all of these different categories, there are first-time users, so not necessarily people who are using digital in this part of their life on a regular basis, but they're trying this out for new right now. And even though it's nice that parents have mastered the use of Snapchat filters, etc., in their video calls, and those things being quite fun, on the other hand, actually, you can also see that this change that is being sort of forced on people at this rate also brings quite a lot of issues with it. We've seen that this has had a really big impact also on widening the wealth gap. As you can see that this sort of adversity is affecting disadvantaged people way more. So while perhaps many of us have become quite cash rich, not going out to dinner, not going on holidays, I can imagine a lot of the people that are tuning in right now are probably more in that category. The harsh reality is actually that this pandemic has hit the most vulnerable in our society disproportionately. So if you listen to the chief economist at the Bank of England, he was saying that the disruption to lives and jobs is the greatest for those in the poorest part of the country, in insecure jobs and with the lowest savings. Actually, also, if you look at the US, there were some recent stats that 30 to 40% of minority and low-income students weren't receiving any schooling during lockdown at all. So you can really imagine that some of those situations will have huge knock-on effects for the most vulnerable in our society. And it's really hard to foresee what they might be, but I'm sure they're not going to be very healthy for the economy or for society at large. So in economic terms, what's quite interesting right now is to look at China, given that they're ahead of the curve in pandemic terms. You can really see how some of the economic changes are playing out over there. So if you look at this chart, this is a chart that shows offline spend, so consumption levels that are not happening in digital, but just purely offline on the streets. And pre sort of lockdown, you can see how people were spending, and it was, quite high levels, and then it really dove down. But as a matter of fact, you don't see some kind of V-shaped recovery where people start spending after lockdown being eased right up to previous levels. But instead, you can see this offline spend sort of finding a new normal, which is at a much lower level than it was before. And if you think about what that means for the economy, you can see that digital will really have to make up quite a lot of this gap. This actually is particularly pertinent given that a lot of businesses have switched into survival mode. So right now you see a lot of businesses that are underinvesting in a lot of the capabilities that actually would be needed for them to fill that gap and to actually enable their services to be consumed in digital ways. So one recent study that was conducted pre-COVID showed that only 4% of CEOs in the UK were not planning to invest in innovation. And only a month later, when COVID hit us and lockdown started, 23% of CEOs suddenly had decided not to invest in innovation. So a huge jump in those numbers. So with us as Idean, most of our work is actually in digital. And we've learned to embrace in working in ways that allowed us to create and test and learn as fast as possible. And we believe that especially in times of uncertainty, where you can't predict what will happen next, you need to be able to listen and to adapt fast. So when we were working with our clients, we framed our response, which we coined the adaptive strategy. And at its core, it's about building adaptability into how you operate as a business. And this means quite often establishing new ways of working and investing in those tools that will enable you and your teams to create, test, and learn faster. Because we believe that that will actually make a huge difference to how businesses can cope with sort of uncertain futures. So when we spoke to our clients, we heard them talk about different challenges that they were facing, and we sort of grouped them into 3 different categories. So on the one hand, organizational challenges, so how we organize our teams and how we organize decision making. Then challenges when it comes to innovation. So these were quite often around reaching and remaining relevant to our customers that are also struggling just as much as us. And then challenges around delivery, which are around accelerating change while our teams are actually increasingly exhausted. And actually, I think at this moment, it's probably a good idea for me to hand over back to Rob and Elin.
Fantastic, Annika. I think you just frozen actually, so that was brilliant timing. But yeah, we're picking this up from you right now. So, Elin, can you hear me okay? So I'm not frozen, am I? No, fantastic.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Right, we'll just keep an eye to sure Annika can rejoin us, but we should be okay because we're now moving on to the interview section. So, yeah, as I said at the start, it's a real pleasure to have you here with us today, Elin, and to talk about the SMARTY story. I thought maybe just to quickly kick off, for those people on the webinar who don't know about SMARTY, do you want to do just a quick intro as to who SMARTY are and the kind of business you represent?
Yeah, of course. So SMARTY is a sub-brand of Three UK, T-Mobile. We are owned by Hutchison, the parent company, and run like an MVNO, a virtual network using Three's network. We launched nearly 3 years ago as a value sub-brand and run a really lean organisation, which allows us to move quickly, develop things quickly, and deliver great value to our customers.
Fantastic. So a very quick personal anecdote, but I actually switched my entire family to SMARTY before I joined Idean, I hasten to add. So hopefully I know what I'm talking about, but yeah, enough of the sales spiel. What we thought would be really interesting is right at the start, we talked about challenging what's possible. And the fact that Idean have obviously worked SMARTY for quite a few years now, but the 2 ways we support clients sort of challenging within their existing business and launching new businesses. And SMARTY is a great example of launching a new venture. So So, Elin, I was just wondering if you had any sort of thoughts you'd like to share with people about, the challenges or founding principles of actually launching a new business for free, and sort of what you faced into, really. So,
Yeah, of course. So SMARTY moved from concept to launch in about 9 months. So it was a really, really quick turnaround. A really exciting time that Idean was sort of working with us all through. And really, I think the guiding principles that helped us keep that momentum, but also be really clear in our direction, was first of all, we were very, very clear that we would be unapologetically digital first. So one of the core principles of SMARTY is that we're digital. That's how we serve our customers. That's how we interact. And at every turn, we just ensured that we were providing the best experience that we could for our customers in a digital manner, and really stopped ourselves swaying from that, although there were lots and lots of examples in use cases where, it may have been a great experience for customers to have things, for example, like contact centre using voice support is a good one, or retail assistance in terms of sign up. So that was one of the things that really helped us power through. And we also came up with our sort of vision around simple, honest mobile. And we used that to really inform all decision making. So everything that we do needs to be simple for our customers, simple for us as employees, the way that we set up our processes, and also honest, so completely transparent in what we're doing, trying to be a real challenger in the industry around some of the kind of trickery that almost goes on with some of the bigger players. Really, really helpful for me as the person sort of running and owning SMARTY was complete autonomy. So I was empowered to take decisions, and also then push that empowerment down into the teams to make sure we were very clear on who owned which decisions, and who was empowered to take those day to day. Certainly, as we were building, it felt like some days you had 100 decisions to make, and just being certain on who owned those, and the ability to make those decisions and move through them quickly, following those guiding principles, was very, very helpful. So that was a great thing that we had. We sort of ran separately from traditional process within the organisation. Our IT was all separate, and really helped us move at pace. However, almost conversely to that, really useful was that we provided lots of the kind of more traditional support functions that we wouldn't have had if we were a true startup. So things like HR, legal, finance, all of those kind of very important kind of administrative type functions were there, and we didn't have to navigate our way through that on our own. So yeah, I think those were the main points.
No, it's great. It's a really interesting balance, isn't it, between being autonomous and able to make your own decisions, but also having three there to back you. And I think, we were talking about this sort of the other day, but it was very prescient of three to go and think about, I guess, de-risking the mothership through launching a whole new MVNO. And I know that, without giving away too much of the game away, but I know you guys are doing fantastically well as you reach close to your third birthday. So, congrats on that. What I was thinking is it might be good to sort of almost come up to the present day, really. And I think, you're obviously general manager of a really successful business, but what have you been sort of, facing in terms of challenges around coronavirus and how it affects your organisation or people? What are the key things that you found?
Yeah, and probably a couple of things to consider here. So there wasn't such a huge shift for us in terms of ways of working. We're a digital only brand, as I've explained, but also we really embrace flexible working. So as a team, we're all used to working from home regularly. So from a tech perspective, that felt quite easy for us to adopt. I think more just sort of thinking on an emotional level for all of the employees at SMARTY, it was just really sort of trying to tap into what that meant to individuals, and try to make sure the experience was as positive as it could be. So for me, that was about, for myself and the other leaders in my team, tapping into individuals. For some people, it was a really poor experience. Some of the people on the team who lived alone and felt very isolated. So for them, it was all about setting up social things, so virtual pubs, virtual coffees, one-to-one sessions to just talk about how the environment that they were now in was impacting them on a personal level. We also just made sure we're very flexible in working hours, welcome kids with open arms, kids on your knees in the calls, was absolutely not a faux pas, and sometimes added lots of fun to the calls. And then just some really, really silly things around WhatsApp groups and themes around, what's the fun topic for the day, that kind of just kept people buoyant. So the little bits of office banter that would keep you going, we tried to bring to life in a virtual way. So that, from a team perspective, was a main piece. From a brand response, I think there was lots of pressure at the beginning, and everyone sort of scrabbling to do something in response for people going through the experience of lockdown. Lots and lots of responses around helping the NHS, things that really we wanted to sit and reflect on so that we avoided tokenism. It did feel a little bit like some brands were jumping on the bandwagon, and actually what they were doing wasn't that impactful. And obviously having lots of family members in the NHS also felt not really that relevant or required by them. So what we ended up doing was something really quite simple, so true to what we tried to be, and also true to our customers. So we took the concept that our customers like to be very savvy. So that sort of sense of being a little bit smart is something that resonates with our customers, and getting a good deal, being able to share a bit of one-upsmanship with their friends. And we just launched some hints and tips through blogs. So really simply pulling together lots of things that were online or on social media around stuff like keeping fit in lockdown, homeschooling in lockdown, very, very practical, that struck a chord with our customers. And we wrote some blogs, promoted them on our social pages, and saw some really, really nice response. So there's significant reach, lots and lots of traffic to our website, but also some nice personal pieces. So customers starting to provide their own hints and tips and responses in the comments sections, and some lovely stories from our customers. One good example being someone telling us they'd found a community support group for their elderly parent who lived at the other end of the country through clicking through one of our blogs and following the links. So yeah, they felt like the two big bits for SMARTY, I think.
No. Fantastic. I think it's really interesting, actually, as an ex-ad man, sorry everybody, that's I guess what the industry I came from, that there is an awful lot, as you described it, of tokenism out there of brands doing the coronavirus advert. And I struggle, even having come from that industry, to name that many of them. So I think having a proper consumer insight and being true to who you are is great. And actually that story, that anecdote you have of somebody actually personally benefiting from what you did around your hints and tips is fantastic. I think maybe just to close us up, and you've probably run through a few of these already, I guess, but it'd be great if there are any sort of key learnings or insights that you think would be good for everybody to take away from the session. And then we'll sort of move on and wrap up and do the Q&A as well. So
sure. So I suppose in terms of key learnings to starting up the brand, and also as we continue through, I would sum it up in terms of autonomy. So for me, autonomy and ownership's been very, very important and key to us being able to drive forward quickly and adapt. Hand in hand with that, empowerment. So not just the autonomy for myself, but also really clear empowerment down through the teams to allow that rapid decision making. And then last, that real sense of purpose. So to be able to be brave and stand behind something that's really meaningful for you, for your brand, for your people. And for us, Simple Honest Mobile has always been that, and has really helped us navigate through.
Fantastic. Look, Ellen, thank you again for joining us today. I'd encourage everybody start shooting out any questions you want to go and pose, and we'll try and take those. But I think just to sort of wrap up the main part of the presentation, Annika, you're going to run us through a few charts, and then we'll summarise and move on for Q&A. So do you want to take it from here?
Yeah. So I think for me, there's probably like a couple of takeaways to add as well. So we're working on the adaptive strategy, and I think there's the sort of most important thing to take away from it are 3 winning moves that we identified that are about making your business more adaptable to the future. And the first one being actually a shift back to the long term. So we've seen businesses drastically change how they make decisions. We've seen projects with year-long timelines being delivered in a matter of days. even HMRC, with the help of some of our CAP colleagues, delivered the government's furlough scheme in less than 10 days. But we believe that there is a limit to how long such tactical agility can sustain a business. And crisis management is by default short-term. However, it shouldn't stand in the way of a long-term vision. And so businesses that stand out and right now have all shifted away from a command and control crisis response to unleashing empowered teams that can act and learn quickly. So the key to this working is aligning people around a long-term vision and a meaningful purpose. And it's key to communicate this really clearly to your teams. If everyone knows what you're aiming to achieve in the long run, you can enable way more people to have agency and to take decisions. And as a whole, this allows you to make decisions and adapt faster to change, and actually also to change that you don't necessarily know what it might look like. So this first move is all about shifting the focus back to the long term, and not just for leadership, but also for your teams. So the second one is around the fact that if the pandemic is teaching us anything, it's that people and organizations are interconnected and responsible to one another and to society in ways that go way beyond short-term earnings. And having a clear sense of purpose that your teams can really rally around will help you weather the storm. We believe that what will set successful businesses apart in the future won't be simply how they have handled this crisis, but it will be found in the way that they have been looking far beyond it. So actually, one of our colleagues, Keith Jacobs, recently said that the pandemic has really heightened the global desire for authenticity and responsibility, particularly from large organizations. And as businesses focus on transformation in the wake of the pandemic, they should put sustainability at the heart of their efforts. And actually, this is something that we can also totally back up by some hot off the press research by the Capgemini Research Institute, saying that today, 79% of consumers are changing their purchase preferences based on social responsibility, inclusivity, and environmental impact. So this is something that a lot of times we've seen people perhaps in research expressing desires around, but not necessarily always acting on. However, this research has actually shown that sustainability concerns are now influencing consumers' behaviors among more than half of the population. So 53% of consumers overall, and 57% in the age group of 18 to 24 years old have switched to lesser known brands because they were more sustainable. So this pandemic has really sped up a lot of inevitable change and necessary change. But I think one of the most positive examples of this must be this change and shift towards more sustainable business practices. So speaking of inevitable change, there can be no denying that the pandemic has also put digital by default on the map across all industries. I think for decades now, people have been saying things like, most people don't have broadband, or they don't have 3G, or they don't have smartphones. But we had to really constantly remind ourselves that not everyone out there is an early adopter. But actually, this time right now is really a time of forced experimentation. And even though not every digital tool that we're using right now will stick, and I'm sure that there's going to be some decisions that are going to have to be made around that. But there's no doubt that whatever normality we're going to settle into, it's going to be one that's going to be way more heavily reliant on digital than it was before. So actually, if you look at this chart right now here, you can see that online food sales in the UK have really skyrocketed in April. And I'm sure this is also something you can relate to in your personal situation. This is an example of people really embracing these differences and new behaviors. So whatever your industry may be, we believe that businesses will need to invest in digital. And this could be in ways similar to what Elin was sharing earlier around creating a new digital venture, the way that SMARTY is one of these, to have a second or a third horse in the running and not just your mothership for business. Or it could also be in different ways around perhaps investing in design systems. So tools that can help your teams and your whole business to adapt to change and actually create, test, and learn quicker in this new environment. So I think those were our three sort of key takeaways. I'm going to hand over back to Rob.
Annika, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for sort of bearing with us over the last sort of 45 minutes. Now, I'll just do one more chart and then we'll shift the Q&A. And thank you, everybody, for sending in lots of great questions. Keep them coming. I think we love this image. I think there was another one I saw a couple of days ago in Bristol with love hearts, which are sort of socially distanced love hearts. You have to go and sit with them in the parks there. But I think what we want to get across from the adaptive strategy is it does feel like now is the right time to sort of pause and take that breath and decide, right, how do we manage short term as well as long term? And actually the brands that are going to thrive are going to have that long-term plan as well as navigating the very challenging waters of right now. And I think the other points Anna was talking about are obviously, you know, that they're a little light touch of our overall adaptive strategy, but sustainable growth is hugely important. We know there is a huge market demand for that. And that's where the future lies. And also digital by default. I think, you know, SMARTY clearly is a digital first brand. And I love that anecdote from Elin that there is no call center. It's actually, you know, get with the project. It's a digital first brand. We have a purity of vision. That's how we're going to go and run things. But I think those kind of overall trends, you know, super interesting. So as I say, thank you everybody for listening in. We will move to the Q&A and I will do my best to sort of see some of the questions that have come in and ask Annika and Elin and maybe a bit myself for a few responses. So the first one we had actually, which came through from Matthew just before, was actually when Matthew accepted the invite in the first place. So we had a chance to prepare this one. So we'll start with this one. But his question was a really good one, which is, how do you achieve the right balance between spreading your business too thinly across multiple projects and putting too much of your investment in a single project and idea? So it's that you know, really common issue we all have is where does the money go and how do we make sure we get the best return really? But Annika, would you like to sort of just share a few thoughts on that to begin with?
Sure. So I think in terms of the timings, I think actually, as a matter of fact, I thought this might maybe a better question actually to ask to Elin. No. Sorry.
Elin, I'm sure you're pressed with this all the time.
Yeah, sure.
For me, apologies. Elin, are you okay with the question? It's sort of investment into multiple projects versus ones that get the best return. What's your view on the best way to handle that?
I think it's always an ongoing struggle. And I suppose a couple of things that I try to do here. First of all is to always reflect and respond. So making sure that we're reflecting on activity that we're running, how is that working? Does it feel like the right balance? And kind of making sure that we're then adjusting our approach based on how we think things are going, and being brave enough to take those decisions. So I've had a few examples where we've been, you know, 80% focused on big pieces of work, but then as the market has moved or our realities have changed, have not felt like the right thing to do. So for me, there's something in there about reflection and quick decision making, so that you're not too wed to something and too scared to take the decision to change. Another piece that I've found quite useful through time is actually trying to use small pieces of work to test and advise those bigger pieces, so that rather than feeling like you're putting all eggs in one basket, you're running a series of smaller tests that help advise the larger pieces of work, so that there's less risk around some of those bigger investments. I suppose in short, I would say it feels like a balance across those, ensuring always being aligned to that larger vision, but using what you can in terms of test and learn to try and qualify a large decision before you make it. Also, not being scared to pivot after taking a decision on the balance. So I'm not sure if that quite answered it, but certainly shared some of the lessons I've had around how we balance workloads and taking decisions to focus.
I think that's great. I mean, I was just going to say that, you know, sort of taking rapid decisions obviously is hugely important, as is making sure there's consumer insight to back those decisions up. So rapid prototyping, making that pivoting decision, you know, go or no go fast and moving on really. But thank you, Elin. So we're going to riff a couple of these guys. We've only got sort of 3 or 4 minutes left, but one of the questions that came in was, how should businesses near-term realities with more renewed long-term focus, particularly in regards to sustainability? So I think it's sort of short versus long-term and the role of sustainability. Annika, it looks like you're going to answer that one.
I'll take that one. Yeah. I think actually there is a huge importance importance to tie this back to purpose. I think actually particularly right now where a lot more people are engaging with businesses and brands in the digital realm, and where a lot more information is actually accessible to people when they're making decisions and kind of like buying into brands and businesses. I think it's even more important to have a really clear purpose as a business. I think that's also something that's, again, relevant to, I think, what was mentioned earlier also by Elin around doing something meaningful right now for your customers or perhaps for vulnerable people in society, rather than kind of answering to tokenism and kind of just doing something to sort of go with everyone else's ideas. I think if you have a really clear purpose to help you guide your decision making and your sort of what you stand for as a business, that will also help you make decisions as to where to invest in. It comes to the situation right now.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I think we're down to the final 2 minutes. So I think one more, which is probably for you again, Elin, if you're okay with that. But I think it's a great question, which is what's the role of adaptive leadership in responding through these times of change? But if you personally found the need to adapt, and if so, is there anything you'd like to share around that? So,
yeah, I think that probably the principles and the way that I lead have remained the same. Because, and that's because it's all about trying to understand your people and the impacts of whichever scenario we're working under those has on them. So for me, that I suppose is adaptive in itself. So I've really tried to think about my team as individuals, understand their individual circumstances, and how I can best help them navigate that, but also think about what that means for our business and our organisation, and help them understand why we need to change and work more quickly. And I suppose just rally them around those things. So yeah, to summarise, one, the role of the personal leader. So understanding your people and the impacts on them always for me is the most important thing, you know, how you relate to individuals and make something meaningful for them, and then helping them navigate through times of substantial change through being excited about the outcome and the vision that you're chasing after, and also making it meaningful for them.
Fantastic, Elin. Thank you for that. I think we're bang on our 45 minutes now, guys. I think we'll probably call it a wrap there. But I just want to say thank you from all of us for bearing with us. Hopefully, we've been pretty slick on the old WebEx. First time we've all used it today, so hopefully it wasn't too bad. But look, we're very much here to help. So if anybody has any more questions about adaptive strategy, we'll have a look at some of the questions when we get round to as well, and see if we can respond to you guys on that as well. But please reach out to us. I'm sure everybody knows where we are. And thank you again for attending. But Elin, Annika, do you want to say thank you to everybody and wish everybody well?
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Bye.
Right. All the best. Thank you all.